training field at Lone Star Working Dog Ranch was quiet that afternoon, until the sound of metal snapping echoed like a thunderclap across the silent field. 6 handlers scattered as a 130-pound Rottweiler tore across the dirt, his chain whipping behind him, eyes locked on something nobody expected. The girl in the wheelchair sat 20 yards away, frozen. Titan had broken free during the evaluation that would decide his fate. One trainer grabbed for a long pole. Another shouted into his radio for backup. Mark Cartwright, the ranch owner, sprinted toward his daughter, but stopped cold when he realized the truth. Titan wasn't running wild. He was running straight at Ava. "Get her out of there!" someone yelled. But there was no time. Titan covered ground faster than any of them could move. His muscles rippled under black fur, scarred from years of failed training attempts. His jaws opened. Dirt exploded behind his paws. Every handler on that field knew what Titan was capable of. 3 men had been injured. Thousands of dollars in equipment destroyed. He had never responded to a single command in 8 months. Not once. And now he was charging a 12-year-old girl who couldn't run. Ava didn't scream. She wheeled forward instead. Her hand lifted into the air. "Titan, stop!" The command came out strong, clear, cutting through the chaos. The Rottweiler skidded so hard his back leg slid out from under him. He stopped 3 inches from her knees. Then he did something that made every man freeze. He whined. Not a growl, not a snarl. A soft, broken sound like he'd been searching for her his whole life. Nobody moved. The handlers stared, tools still raised, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Mark's hands were shaking. Titan lowered his massive head and pressed it against Ava's palm. His tail didn't wag. His body didn't relax. But his eyes stayed locked on hers like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. One of the trainers whispered, "That's impossible." Titan had been scheduled for the final decision in 72 hours. Dangerous, unpredictable, beyond saving. But this girl who'd lost the ability to walk 8 months ago in a crash that nearly ended her had just stopped him with a single word. What nobody on that field understood yet was why. Why would a dog trained to dominate, a dog soaked in trauma and rage, respond to a child he had never met? The answer was buried in Titan's past, in a night that haunted him the same way the crash haunted Ava. Before we go further, drop your country in the comments. I want to know where this story is reaching you because communities like this are why we tell these stories. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for what comes next. So please like, share, and subscribe. To understand what happened on that field, we have to go back 8 months. Back to the night Titan became a nightmare in the system. Back to the crash that put Ava in that wheelchair. Because this story doesn't start with a miracle. It starts with 2 tragedies that nobody thought could be undone. Lone Star Working Dog Ranch sat 40 miles outside Baton Rouge, where the roads turned to gravel and the only sounds were wind through tall grass and the distant bark of dogs being trained. The property stretched across 60 acres of open Louisiana land, fields of brown dirt and patches of green. An old oak tree stood near the main training area, its branches thick enough to provide shade for the handlers who gathered there most afternoons. The men wore dark jackets with the ranch logo stitched on the back. They carried long poles, thick gloves, protective sleeves, equipment that looked more like tactical gear than dog training tools. Mark Cartwright had built this place from nothing. 20 years of working with dogs nobody else wanted. police rejects, military washouts, animals with behavioral problems that made shelters turn them away. He'd saved dozens, rehabilitated them, found them homes or jobs. But Titan was different. Mark knew it the moment the transport van pulled up 3 months earlier. The driver wouldn't even open the crate. Just left it on the ground and drove off fast. Inside that crate was a 130-pound Rottweiler with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. His coat was black as oil, chest and legs marked with the breed's signature tan, but it was the scars that told his real story. A jagged line across his shoulder. Another along his ribs, marks from corrections that went too far, from handlers who thought pain was the answer. Titan didn't trust humans anymore. Why would he? The first week, Titan destroyed 2 reinforced leashes, bent a steel crate door, and sent a trainer to the hospital with a dislocated shoulder. Not because the man hit him, because he got too close. The second week, Titan tore through a bite sleeve and kept going until 3 men pulled him off. By week 4, the other dogs wouldn't go near his enclosure. They could smell something on him that made them back away. Fear, rage, something deeper that didn't have a name. Mark watched Titan every day from outside the fence. Watched him pace the same pattern for hours. Watched him refuse food until nightfall. Watched him flinch at sudden movements even though he'd strike without warning. The dog wasn't mean. Mark had seen mean. This was different. Titan was broken in a way that made him dangerous because he didn't know who to trust or when the next hit was coming. He was surviving on instinct, and instinct told him to strike first. The paperwork came through on a Tuesday morning. Final evaluation scheduled for Friday afternoon. 3 strikes already on his record. 1 more incident and the state would mandate the end. No appeals, no second chances. Mark signed the form with a pen that felt too heavy in his hand. He'd failed dogs before. It happened. But something about Titan made this one hurt worse. Because underneath all that rage and fear, Mark saw a dog who just wanted to feel safe again. A dog who'd been punished for trying to do the right thing and couldn't understand why the world turned on him. Thursday night, Mark sat in his office staring at Titan's file. 3 handlers had already refused to participate in tomorrow's evaluation. Too dangerous, they said. Not worth the risk. The ones who agreed only did it because Mark asked personally. They respected him, trusted his judgment. But even they looked nervous when they talked about getting in the ring with Titan one last time. Mark closed the file and looked out the window toward the kennels. Titan was out there right now, pacing under the security lights, waiting for something he couldn't name. Tomorrow would decide everything. Pass the evaluation, and maybe there was a path forward. Fail, and Titan would be gone by Monday morning. What nobody knew was that his life would change that afternoon, because someone unexpected was coming, someone who would see past the scars and the aggression to the soul underneath, someone who understood what it meant to survive something that should have broken you. Friday morning arrived with clouds hanging low over the ranch. Mark hadn't slept. He'd spent most of the night running through scenarios in his head, trying to figure out how to get Titan through the evaluation without someone getting hurt. But when he pulled into the driveway at dawn, his wife Claire was already awake, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "She wants to come with you today," Claire said before he could even pour coffee. Mark stopped. "Ava?" "She heard you on the phone last night talking about the evaluation. She asked if she could see the ranch again." Claire's voice was careful, measured. They'd been walking on eggshells for 8 months, ever since the crash. Mark, she hasn't asked to leave the house in weeks. He thought about saying no. Thought about all the reasons why bringing a 12-year-old to a dangerous dog evaluation was a terrible idea. But then he remembered the look in Ava's eyes lately. Empty, distant, like she was watching her own life happen to someone else. If she wanted to come, maybe that meant something was shifting. Maybe she was finally ready to start healing. All right, he said quietly. But she stays in the office, nowhere near the training field. Ava rolled into the kitchen 20 minutes later, wearing jeans and a red flannel shirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. The wheelchair still looked too big for her, too permanent. Mark hated seeing her in it, hated remembering the night the hospital called. Reckless driver ran a red light. Ava's friend was lost on impact. Ava survived, but her spine didn't. The doctors said she might walk again someday with enough physical therapy and a miracle. But 8 months later, the chair was still there. "Ready?" she asked, and there was something in her voice he hadn't heard in a while. Curiosity. A spark of the girl she used to be. They drove to the ranch in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind. Ava watched the fields pass by, the way the morning light hit the trees. When they pulled through the gates, she sat up straighter. "I forgot how big this place is." 60 acres of trouble, Mark said with a half smile. "You remember the rules?" "Stay in the office, don't wander, don't touch anything that bites." She grinned. "I'm 12, Dad, not 6. The handlers were already gathering near the oak tree when they arrived. Mark saw the way their faces changed when Ava rolled out of the truck. Concern, unease. One of them, a younger guy named Cole, walked over fast. "Boss, you sure about this?" he asked quietly, glancing at Ava. "With Titan loose for the eval—" "She's staying inside," Mark cut him off. "It's fine." But Ava wasn't looking at the office. She was looking across the field toward the kennels, where a chain-link enclosure stood separate from the others. "Is that him?" she asked. "The dog you're testing today?" Mark followed her gaze. Titan was pacing behind the fence, his massive frame moving in that same relentless pattern, back and forth, back and forth. "Yeah," Mark said. "That's Titan. Can I see him?" "Ava." "Not close, just from outside the fence." Her eyes met his, and there was something in them he couldn't refuse. A quiet strength that reminded him she'd already survived worse than most people ever face. "Please, Dad." He nodded slowly. 5 minutes, then you go inside." They crossed the field together, Ava's wheelchair rolling over dirt and grass. The handlers watched, but didn't say anything. As they got closer to the enclosure, Mark felt his chest tighten. Titan was still pacing, his head low, muscles tense under his black coat. The dog looked like a coiled spring waiting to go off. But then Ava rolled past the fence line. Titan stopped. Not gradually, not with hesitation. He froze mid-step like someone had hit a pause button. His ears dropped. His tail stopped its rigid position. For the first time in 3 months, Titan stood completely still. Mark's breath caught. Behind them, one of the handlers whispered, "What the hell?" Ava didn't notice. She moved closer to the fence, her hands resting on the wheels of her chair. "Hey there," she said softly. Titan's head turned toward her voice. His eyes locked into hers. Not with the hard, aggressive stare Mark had seen 100 times. This was different. Searching. Like he was trying to understand something he'd forgotten existed. The dog took 2 slow steps toward the fence. Then he sat. Just sat there, watching her with an intensity that made Mark's skin prickle. "He's scared," Ava said quietly. "He's dangerous," Mark corrected, but his voice had no conviction. Ava shook her head. "No, look at his eyes. He's scared." She reached toward the fence, and Mark's hand shot out to stop her. But Titan didn't growl, didn't bark. He lowered his head and kept watching. Waiting. One of the handlers jogged over. "Mark, this is the first time he's stopped pacing since he got here. First time." Mark couldn't take his eyes off the dog, off his daughter, off the impossible thing happening between them. Titan's breathing had slowed. His body had relaxed in a way Mark had never seen. It was like someone had flipped a switch inside him, and the switch was Ava. "We should get you inside," Mark said, but his voice was distracted. Ava nodded, but she didn't move right away. She kept her eyes on Titan. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Long story," Mark said. "I'll tell you later." As they turned to leave, Titan stood and moved to the fence. He pressed his face against the chain link, watching Ava roll away. His eyes followed her across the field until she disappeared into the office. Then, slowly, he laid down. Not pacing, not agitated, just resting, like he'd finally found something worth being calm for. The handler stared in stunned silence. Cole shook his head. "In 3 months, I've never seen him do that." Mark didn't respond. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed, trying to understand why a dog who trusted no one had just chosen to trust his daughter. Ava didn't know why he looked at her like that, but Titan did. If this moment gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because what's about to happen at the evaluation will leave you speechless. Drop a comment if you believe some connections can't be explained, they can only be felt. The evaluation was scheduled for 2 o'clock. By 1:30, the handlers had gathered near the oak tree, checking equipment and reviewing the protocol. Mark had sent Ava to the office 3 times, but she kept rolling back to the window, watching. He didn't have the energy to fight her on it. Truth was, part of him understood. She'd spent 8 months trapped inside her own limitations. Maybe watching something fight for its survival made her feel less alone. Titan was brought out on a reinforced harness, 2 handlers on either side holding tension lines. The dog's muscles rippled under his coat. His eyes scanned the field, taking in every person, every movement. Mark could see the stress building in Titan's body, the way his shoulders bunched, the way his breathing quickened. This wasn't going to go well. "We'll start with basic obedience," Mark called out. "Sit, stay, recall. Keep it simple." The lead handler, a broad-shouldered man named Ray, nodded and moved Titan to the center of the field. The dog resisted every step, pulling against the harness, his head swinging left and right. Ray commanded him to sit. Titan ignored him. Commanded again. Nothing. The 3rd time, Titan spun and snapped at the air near Ray's hand. Not a bite, a warning. "Let's try the pull drill," Mark said, his voice tight. "See if we can redirect the energy." They attached Titan to a weighted sled used for building, drive, and focus. The harness clicked into place, and Ray stepped back, giving the command to pull. Titan lunged forward, and the sled moved. Good. He pulled again, harder this time, his body lowering into the work. For a moment, Mark thought maybe they'd found something. Maybe this would be enough to pass him. Then the latch slipped. Sound of metal snapping. It happened so fast nobody had time to react. The harness buckle, worn from Titan's previous attempts to break free, gave way under the pressure. The straps fell loose. Titan stumbled forward, realized he was free, and froze for half a second. Then he bolted. "Grab him!" Ray shouted. But Titan was already gone, tearing across the field at full speed. Boots hit dirt. Handlers scrambled in different directions. Cole grabbed for a long pole, but slipped on loose gravel and went down hard. Another man fumbled with his radio, screaming for someone to bring sedatives. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. His eyes tracked Titan's path, trying to predict where the dog would go, what he'd do. Then he saw it. Titan wasn't running wild. He was running straight toward the office, straight toward the window, straight toward Ava. "No!" Mark sprinted, his legs burning, lungs gasping. He could see Ava through the glass, sitting in her wheelchair, her face pressed close to watch. She didn't understand the danger, didn't realize what was coming. Mark's hand reached out, fingers grasping at air, trying to close the distance. But Titan was faster, always faster. The office door was open. Mark had left it cracked for airflow. Titan hit the threshold and kept going. Mark reached the doorway 3 seconds later, his mind screaming the unthinkable. But when he burst inside, the scene that greeted him stopped him cold. Ava had rolled away from the window. She was in the center of the small room now, her wheelchair facing the door. Titan was 10 feet away, his body low, moving toward her with that same intensity Mark had seen at the fence earlier. But this was different. This was raw, uncontrolled. "Ava, don't move," Mark started. But his daughter wasn't listening. She wheeled forward, not back, forward, directly toward the charging dog. "Ava!" Mark lunged, his hand reaching for the wheelchair, but he hesitated. One wrong pull and he'd tip her. One wrong move and she'd hit the floor. His body locked up, paralyzed by fear. Titan accelerated. Dirt from his paws streaked across the office floor. His jaws parted. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the sound vibrating through the walls. Handlers poured into the doorway behind Mark, their voices shouting commands, threats, anything to stop what was about to happen. Ava lifted her hand into the air. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and strong. "Titan, stop!" The Rottweiler's legs locked, his body twisted mid-stride, claws scraping against the floor as he fought against his own momentum. He skidded sideways, his massive frame sliding until he stopped 3 inches from Ava's knees. Close enough that she could feel his breath. Close enough to see the scars on his shoulder, the wildness in his eyes. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Titan whined. Not the sound of aggression, not a growl building into an attack. A soft, broken whine that sounded like relief. Like he'd been running his whole life and finally found the place he was supposed to stop. He lowered his head and pressed it against Ava's outstretched palm. His eyes closed, his body sagged. Ava's hand rested on his scarred head, her fingers gentle. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're okay now." Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his heart still hammering. Behind him, Ray and Cole stared, their tools hanging useless at their sides. One of the younger handlers had his phone out, recording, his hand shaking so badly the footage was probably unusable. "What just happened?" Cole breathed. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Every man on that field had just seen the impossible. A dog that had never obeyed a single command. A dog scheduled for the final decision in 48 hours. A dog everyone had given up on. He'd just stopped on a dime for a 12-year-old girl in a wheelchair. And he'd done it because she asked. That evening, after the handlers had left and the ranch settled into quiet, Mark sat across from Ava in the living room. Titan's file lay open on the coffee table between them. Claire brought tea but didn't stay. She knew this conversation needed to happen without her hovering. Ava hadn't stopped talking about Titan since they got home, asking questions, pushing for answers. Why was he so aggressive? What happened to make him that way? Why did everyone want to end his story? Mark had deflected for hours, but now, watching his daughter's eyes burn with the kind of fire he hadn't seen since before the crash, he realized she deserved the truth. His name wasn't always Titan, Mark began, flipping through the pages. When he was a puppy, they called him Baron. He was bred in Texas by a company that specialized in high-end protection dogs. The kind wealthy families bought to keep their homes safe. Cost about $40,000. Ava's eyes widened. 40,000? Elite training. Elite bloodline. He was supposed to be perfect. Mark paused, choosing his words carefully. And for 2 years, he was. The family that bought him had a daughter, 9 years old. Titan, Baron, was her shadow. Followed her everywhere. Slept outside her bedroom door. The kind of bond people pay that much money hoping to get. So, what happened? Ava leaned forward, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. Mark exhaled slowly. Break-in. Middle of the night. 2 men forced the back door while the family was sleeping. Baron heard them first. He went after them before they could reach the stairs. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Mark could see Ava processing, her mind filling in the gaps. He stopped them, Mark continued. Took down the first guy in the kitchen. The second one tried to run, but Baron caught him in the hallway. By the time it was over, both men were on the ground, neutralized, waiting for the police. Baron had done exactly what he was trained to do. He protected his family. Then why? Ava started, but Mark held up a hand. The daughter woke up during the fight, came downstairs and saw Baron standing over one of the men, teeth bared, growling. She didn't understand what she was seeing. All she knew was there was conflict and confusion, and her dog looked like a monster. Ava's face went pale. She got scared. She screamed, wouldn't stop screaming. When the police arrived, they found her hysterical, backing away from Baron. Found the 2 injured men, and they made an assumption. Mark's jaw tightened. They assumed Baron had turned dangerous, that he'd gone rogue. The parents tried to explain, but the daughter was too traumatized to tell them what really happened. She just kept screaming every time Baron got close. So they took him away, Ava whispered. Animal control classified him as dangerous, extreme aggression, unpredictable behavior. The family didn't fight it. They were too busy trying to help their daughter recover. So Baron got shipped to a facility that was supposed to rehabilitate him. Mark closed the file. But they didn't rehabilitate him. They misunderstood him. Every time he reacted out of fear or confusion, they corrected him. They pushed him. They broke his spirit trying to fix something that wasn't broken in the first place. Ava's hands trembled in her lap. He saved that girl. He did. And she screamed at him, and everyone punished him for it. Mark nodded. He didn't understand. All he knew was that he'd done what he was supposed to do, and suddenly the world turned on him. The people he trusted hurt him, rejected him. He spent 2 years bouncing between facilities, getting worse with every stop. By the time he got here, he didn't trust anyone, couldn't trust anyone. Ava was quiet for a long moment, staring at the file. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I screamed too. Mark's chest tightened. Ava! After the crash, When I woke up in the hospital and couldn't feel my legs, I screamed at everyone. The doctors, you, Mom, everyone trying to help me. Tears welled in her eyes. And I didn't mean it. I was just scared. I didn't know how to handle what happened to me. Mark moved to her side, kneeling so they were eye level. That's different. Is it? Ava looked at him, and the weight in her gaze made him ache. Titan protected someone and got punished for it. I survived something horrible and pushed everyone away because I didn't know what else to do. We both got hurt by things we couldn't control, and everyone treated us like we were the problem. Mark didn't have an answer, because she was right. He'd watched his daughter retreat into herself for 8 months. Watched her build walls nobody could break through. And he'd watched Titan do the same thing. 2 souls crushed by trauma, branded as broken. Written off by people who didn't understand that sometimes survival looks like rage. He's not violent, Dad, Ava said firmly. He's hurting. And nobody's ever told him it's okay, that he didn't do anything wrong. Mark studied his daughter's face. Saw the determination there, the empathy, the kind of strength that only comes from living through your own nightmare and coming out the other side still willing to care about someone else's pain. You think you can reach him? Mark asked quietly. I think we can reach each other. Ava wiped her eyes. Because I know what it feels like when everyone's given up on you. When they look at you like you're already gone. Mark stood, his hand resting on her shoulder. Outside, the ranch was dark except for the security lights near the kennels. Somewhere out there, Titan was probably pacing again. Reliving that night, wondering why saving someone had cost him everything. He didn't fail that girl, Ava whispered, her voice steady now. He just needed someone to tell him that. Mark looked at his daughter and realized something had shifted. Not just in her, in all of this. Maybe Titan wasn't the only one who needed saving. Maybe Ava did too. And maybe the only way either of them healed was together. But what neither of them knew yet was that the hardest test was still coming. And it would force Titan to make a choice that would prove once and for all whether a broken dog could ever truly be trusted again. The next morning, Ava was up before dawn. Mark found her in the kitchen, already dressed, her wheelchair positioned by the door like she had been waiting for hours. Ranch opens in 20 minutes, she said before he could ask. Mark poured coffee and studied his daughter. The emptiness that had lived in her eyes for 8 months was gone, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten she had. Purpose. They arrived at Lone Star as the sun broke over the tree line, painting the fields gold. Ava rolled straight to Titan's enclosure without asking permission. The dog was already awake, standing at the fence like he had been expecting her. When he saw her wheelchair come into view, his tail moved. Not a full wag, just a slight shift. But it was more than Mark had seen from him in 3 months. Morning, Ava said softly, stopping a few feet from the chain link. Titan approached slowly, his head lowered, eyes locked on hers. He sat without being told. Waited. Can I go inside? Ava asked, turning to her father. Every instinct Mark had read to know. But he looked at Titan, looked at the way the dog's entire body had relaxed the moment Ava arrived. Looked at his daughter, who was asking to do something brave instead of hiding from the world. I'll be right here, Mark said, unlocking the gate. Ava rolled inside, and Titan stood but didn't move toward her. He waited for her to close the distance. When she stopped a few feet away, she extended her hand. Come here, boy. Titan walked to her slowly, each step deliberate, careful. He pressed his massive head into her palm and closed his eyes. Ava ran her fingers over the scars on his shoulder, the rough patches where his fur had grown back wrong. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she whispered. For the next hour, Ava worked with Titan in ways that defied everything Mark knew about dog training. She didn't use commands the way handlers didn't bark orders or demand obedience. She talked to him like he understood every word, and somehow he did. "Sit," she said gently. Titan sat. "Stay." She rolled backward a few feet. Titan stayed, his eyes tracking her movement but his body perfectly still. "Come." He walked to her, his pace matching the speed of her wheelchair. Ray and Cole had gathered outside the fence, watching in silence. When Ava dropped her glove, accidentally reaching for her water bottle, Titan moved before anyone could react, but he didn't snatch it. He picked it up with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a dog his size, carried it to Ava, and placed it carefully in her lap. "Good boy," Ava said, scratching behind his ears. Titan leaned into her touch, his eyes half closed, his breathing deep and even. Ray shook his head slowly. "I don't believe it." Cole pulled out his phone, recording. "Nobody's going to believe it." Mark stood outside the gate, his arms crossed, watching his daughter move around the enclosure with a 130-pound dog following her like a shadow. Titan responded to every cue, adjusted his position when she turned, stopped when she stopped. It wasn't obedience, it was something deeper. "He isn't listening to her the way he listens to trainers," Mark said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "He's choosing her." By the end of the week, Ava was spending 3 hours a day at the ranch. Titan's transformation was undeniable. He ate consistently, stopped pacing. His body language shifted from tense and guarded to calm and focused. When other handlers approached, he still showed wariness. But when Ava was near, he was a different dog entirely. The ranch staff started whispering, conversations in low voices near the oak tree, speculation over lunch breaks. Is Ava the key? Could this actually work? Is Titan salvageable after all? Dogs that failed evaluations didn't get second chances. But dogs that failed evaluations didn't usually stop mid-charge for a 12-year-old either. Mark filed a formal request with the state to extend Titan's evaluation period, cited unusual circumstances, attached video footage of Ava working with him. 3 days later, the approval came through. 30 more days. One more chance. Claire watched from the porch that evening as Ava and Titan sat together in the yard, the dog's head resting on her lap while she read aloud from a book. "She's different," Claire said softly. "She's healing." Mark nodded. So is he. "What happens if this doesn't work? If something goes wrong?" "Then we deal with it." But Mark's voice carried a weight he couldn't hide, because he'd seen what Ava looked like before Titan. And he'd seen her now. The girl who'd stopped talking about the future was suddenly making plans, asking questions, laughing again. If they took Titan away, Mark didn't know if she'd survive losing something else. But across the ranch, standing in the shadow of the equipment shed, head trainer Grant watched Ava and Titan through narrowed eyes. He'd been at Lone Star longer than anyone, 15 years of working with high-risk dogs. And he'd learned one rule that never changed: a dog that strikes once will strike again. Grant didn't care about the videos, didn't care about the progress reports. He'd seen aggressive dogs fool people before, seen them play nice until the moment they didn't. And when that moment came, and it always came, someone got hurt. He crossed his arms and made a decision. Tomorrow he'd run his own test. A real test. The kind that would prove what Titan really was underneath all the gentle behavior. Because Grant had seen men pay the price trusting dogs like this. And he wasn't going to let a little girl be next. But one man still didn't believe it. Before we continue, you and most people watching right now might never see another video from this channel, all because you forgot to subscribe. So please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It is literally the only way you tell me that the hours researching, writing, and editing these stories was worth it. Now, let's get back to the story. Grant arrived early the next morning, before Ava and Mark pulled through the gates. He'd brought equipment most trainers kept locked away. A padded bite sleeve reinforced with Kevlar. A training stick used for sound correction. Tools designed to test a dog's thresholds, to push them until their true nature showed. Ray saw him setting up near Titan's enclosure and jogged over. "What are you doing?" "What someone should have done weeks ago," Grant said, strapping the sleeve onto his arm. "Real evaluation, not this soft stuff the girl's been doing." "Mark approved this?" Grant's jaw tightened. Mark's too close to see clearly. His daughter's involved, so he's seeing what he wants to see. But I've been training dogs since before that kid was born, and I know manipulation when I see it. Titan's been perfect for 2 weeks. "Titan's been waiting," Grant cut him off. "Dogs like him don't change. They adapt. They figure out what behavior gets them what they want. And right now, he wants everyone to think he's safe so they'll let their guard down." He finished securing the sleeve. "I'm not letting that happen." By the time Mark and Ava arrived, Grant had already moved Titan to the training ring. The dog was on a short lead, tension radiating through his body. He could sense something different in the air. Something wrong. Mark got out of the truck and saw the setup. His face went hard. "Grant, what the hell are you doing?" "Dominance test," Grant said evenly. "Standard protocol for high-risk dogs. You know this." "We're past that." "Titan's responding to positive." "Titan's responding to a little girl he thinks he can control." Grant turned to face Mark fully. "You really want to risk her safety on a feeling? On some bond you think exists but can't prove will hold when it counts?" Mark's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't have an answer. Because deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, he'd asked himself the same question. What if Grant was right? What if this was temporary? What if Titan turned one day when Ava was too close to escape? Ava rolled up beside her father, her eyes on Titan. The dog was staring at Grant with a look she'd never seen before. Not aggression, fear. "Dad, don't let him do this!" "It's already done," Grant said. He raised the training tool and created a sudden, sharp crack near Titan. The sound echoed across the field. Titan flinched violently, his body dropping low. Then something inside him broke. He lunged forward, barking, the sound raw and guttural, his teeth bared, his eyes wild. He slammed against the fence so hard the chain link rattled. Grant stepped back, raising the padded sleeve, ready for the bite. "See?" Grant shouted over the barking. "This is his nature!" Titan was spiraling, his trauma flooding back in waves, the corrections, the pressure, the confusion. He barked again, throwing himself at the fence, trying to get away from the man with the stick, trying to protect himself the only way he knew how. "Stop it!" Ava screamed. "You're scaring him!" "I'm testing him," Grant shot back. Ray stepped forward. Grant, this isn't— Stay back. Grant snapped the tool again. Titan's barking turned desperate. He spun in circles, looking for escape, finding none. His claws dug into the dirt. Panic took over. Every handler on the field saw it. The dog was breaking. "We need to end this," Cole said, his voice urgent. But before anyone could move, Ava rolled toward the gate. "Ava, no!" Mark lunged for her wheelchair, but she was faster, her hands spinning the wheels with strength born from 8 months of physical therapy. She reached the gate and yanked it open. "Get her out of there," Grant yelled, dropping the tool and running toward the enclosure. But Ava was already inside. Titan was still barking, still spinning, his mind trapped in a place of confusion and fear where nothing made sense. Ava wheeled directly into his path. "Titan!" Her voice cut through the chaos. "Titan, look at me!" The dog froze mid-bark. His head swung toward her voice. "It's okay," Ava said, her hand steady on the wheels. "You're okay. Nobody's going to hurt you." Titan's barking stopped. His breathing was ragged, his body trembling, but his eyes locked onto Ava's face. She moved closer, slowly, her voice soft and calm. "You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? You didn't do anything wrong." Titan whined. The same broken sound he'd made the first day. He took 2 hesitant steps toward her, then collapsed at her feet, his massive head pressing against her knees. His body shook, but the aggression was gone. Shut down like someone had flipped a switch. The field went silent. Grant stood outside the fence, his chest heaving, staring at the scene in front of him. Ray and Cole stood beside him, equally stunned. Mark had his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. Ava ran her fingers through Titan's fur, whispering words only he could hear. The dog's breathing slowed, his muscles relaxed. Within 60 seconds, he looked like a different animal. Calm. Safe. Trusting. Grant's voice came out hoarse. "That's not possible." "It just happened," Ray said quietly. Grant shook his head, but the defiance was gone from his face. He looked at Titan, really looked, and saw something he hadn't allowed himself to see before. The dog wasn't manipulating, he was surviving. And the only person who made him feel safe enough to stop surviving and start living was the girl in the wheelchair. "This isn't obedience," Grant said finally, his voice barely audible. "This is trust." Mark walked to the gate, his hand resting on the chain link. He looked at his daughter sitting with a dog everyone had written off. 2 broken souls who'd found each other in the wreckage. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Grant turned and walked toward the equipment shed without another word. He'd been wrong, and admitting that cost him something he couldn't name. But as he glanced back one more time, he saw Titan resting his head in Ava's lap, saw the way the dog's eyes stayed closed in complete surrender, and he felt something shift in his chest. Maybe some bonds couldn't be tested. Maybe they could only be witnessed. But the real test, the one that would decide Titan's fate, was still ahead. The state evaluators arrived on a Thursday afternoon in an unmarked white van. 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing polo shirts with the Department of Agriculture logo stitched on the chest. They carried clipboards, cameras, and the kind of expressions that said they'd already made up their minds before getting out of the vehicle. Mark met them at the gate, his palms sweating despite the cool breeze. "Appreciate you coming out?" The woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez didn't smile. "We've reviewed Titan's file. 2 failed evaluations, multiple aggressive incidents. This is his third and final assessment. You understand what that means?" "I do." Mark's voice was steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. "Third strike means mandatory removal," she continued. "No appeals, no extensions. If we determine he's a danger, the final order goes into effect immediately." Mark nodded. Behind him, Ava sat in her wheelchair near the oak tree, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Titan was in the training ring, already pacing. He could feel the tension, could sense that something was different today. The evaluators set up their equipment while Mark briefed them on Titan's progress, the behavioral changes, the bond with Ava. Dr. Vasquez listened, taking notes, her face unreadable. "We'll need to see him respond to standard commands without the girl present," she said. "That's protocol." "He responds better when—" "Without the girl, Mr. Cartwright." Mark's stomach dropped. He glanced at Ava, who was already shaking her head. She knew what this meant. So did Titan. Grant entered the ring first, holding a lead. Titan's eyes tracked him, and his body went rigid. The noise test was still fresh in the dog's mind. Grant approached slowly, speaking commands in a firm voice. "Sit." Titan didn't move. "Sit," Grant repeated, sharper this time. Titan's breathing quickened. His paws shifted in the dirt. The evaluators watched, their pens moving across clipboards. "Stay," Grant commanded, but Titan was already spiraling. His head swung left, then right. His chest heaved. He wasn't seeing the ring anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark, reliving every correction, every pressure, every moment someone had hurt him for doing what he thought was right. "He's regressing," one of the male evaluators said quietly. Dr. Vasquez stepped closer to the fence. "Mr. Cartwright, this animal is displaying signs of severe anxiety and potential aggression. If he can't follow basic commands—" "Give him a minute," Mark pleaded. But Titan didn't have a minute. His pacing intensified. His growl started low, building. Grant took a step back, his hand moving toward the emergency release on the lead. "This is going to be a fail," the male evaluator said, making a notation. Ava didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for approval. She just moved. Her wheelchair rolled forward, wheels cutting through grass and dirt, heading straight for the ring gate. "Ava, stop!" Mark shouted, breaking into a run. But she was already inside, the gate swinging shut behind her. "Get that child out of there!" Dr. Vasquez yelled. Grant lunged toward Ava, trying to grab the wheelchair, but she wheeled past him, directly into Titan's path. The dog was still pacing, still growling, his mind trapped in the nightmare. He didn't see her at first. "Titan," Ava said softly. His head snapped toward her voice. "It's me." She stopped a few feet away, her hand extended. "You're okay? You didn't do anything wrong?" Titan's growling stopped. His pacing slowed. He stared at her like he was trying to remember something important, something true. Mark reached the fence, his hands gripping the chain link, his voice hoarse. "Ava, please!" But she wasn't listening. She rolled closer, her hand reaching out until her fingers brushed Titan's scarred cheek. "Nobody's going to hurt you," she whispered. "Not anymore, I promise." Titan's legs buckled. He collapsed gently, his massive body folding until his head rested in Ava's lap. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. The tension drained from his muscles like water through open fingers. He didn't move, didn't growl, just rested there, surrendering completely to the only person who'd ever made him feel safe. The field went silent. Dr. Vasquez stood at the fence, her clipboard lowered, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and disbelief. The two male evaluators had stopped writing. Grant stood motionless. One of the male evaluators spoke first, his voice quiet. "That's not aggression?" "No," Dr. Vasquez agreed slowly. "That's fear. Trauma response." Mark's throat tightened. He watched his daughter sitting with Titan, watched the way she stroked his head. This wasn't dominance. This wasn't control. This was something deeper. Dr. Vasquez turned to her colleagues. They conferred in low voices. Finally, she approached Mark, her expression softer than it had been all afternoon. "This is highly irregular," she said carefully. "But what we just witnessed suggests this animal's behavior is context-dependent. He's reactive to stress, not inherently aggressive. And in the presence of your daughter, he demonstrates complete behavioral control." Mark's heart stuttered. "What does that mean?" Dr. Vasquez looked back at the ring one more time. At Ava, at Titan, at the impossible bond that had just saved a life. "It means Titan passes the evaluation, his life is spared." Mark's knees nearly gave out. Relief crashed through him so hard he had to grip the fence to stay upright. Behind him, Ray and Cole erupted in quiet cheers. Grant stood alone near the equipment shed, his arms crossed, but his face had softened into something close to respect. "Doctor." C. Vasquez raised a hand. "But there are conditions. Titan remains under your supervision at all times. Any incidents, any at all, and this decision is reversed immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Mark said, his voice breaking. The evaluators packed their equipment and left without ceremony. Mark opened the gate and walked into the ring. Ava looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, her hand still resting on Titan's head. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it?" Mark corrected, kneeling beside her. He looked at Titan, whose eyes were open now, calm and clear. "You both did." That night, the ranch celebrated quietly. Titan was moved to a larger enclosure with better bedding. Ava stayed late, sitting with him until the stars came out. The dog who'd been 72 hours from the end was now sleeping peacefully, his head resting on a blanket she'd brought from home. But safety on the ranch was never guaranteed. If you're celebrating right now, hit that like button and share this story with everyone you know. Comment below and tell us, have you ever fought for something everyone said was hopeless? Because what happens next will test this bond in ways nobody saw coming. 3 days after the evaluation, life at Lone Star Ranch had settled into a rhythm nobody expected. Titan spent his mornings with Ava, following her wheelchair across the property, responding to commands with a consistency that still made the handlers shake their heads in wonder. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. The morning started ordinary. Ava arrived early with a bag of treats. Mark was in the office. A ranch hand named Tommy was doing maintenance on one of the ATVs near the top of the hill that sloped down toward the main training field. Tommy finished checking the oil, climbed off to grab a rag from his truck, and made the kind of mistake that happens in a split second. He forgot to set the parking brake. The ATV sat on the hill for 5 seconds. Then gravity took over. It rolled backward slowly at first. Tommy turned, saw it moving, and started running. "Hey, someone stop that thing!" But the slope was steep. The ATV picked up speed fast, wheels turning faster, momentum building. It wasn't heading toward the equipment shed. It was heading straight for the area where Ava sat with Titan near the water station, 30 yards downhill. Ray saw it first. "Ava, move!" Ava's head snapped up. She saw the ATV barreling toward her and spun the wheels of her chair, trying to get out of the path, but the ground near the water station was soft from yesterday's rain. Mud. Her wheels dug in and stuck. She pushed harder, panic flooding her veins, but the chair wouldn't budge. "Ava!" Mark burst out of the office, sprinting across the field, but he was too far. 60 yards at least. The ATV was 20 yards away and closing fast. Cole grabbed a pole and started running, but he knew he wouldn't make it in time. Tommy was still shouting, his voice cracking with fear. The ATV was a runaway weight now, rolling downhill at full speed, its momentum enough to overpower anything in its path. Titan saw it. He had been lying in the grass beside Ava's chair, but when her wheels spun in the mud and her breathing changed, when that scent of fear hit the air, his eyes snapped open. He saw the machine, saw Ava trapped, saw the distance closing. He didn't hesitate. Titan launched himself forward, a blur of black fur and raw power. He covered the ground in seconds, faster than anyone had ever seen him move. He positioned himself directly between Ava and the oncoming ATV, his legs braced, his body low. "Titan, no!" Mark screamed. The ATV hit him full force. Sound of heavy metallic impact. The impact was immense. Titan's body absorbed the collision, his legs buckling under the weight. The sound echoed across the field, a heavy thud that made everyone freeze. The ATV's momentum faltered, slowed by the mass of the dog in its path. But Titan didn't fall. He staggered, his body shaking, but he stayed on his feet. He planted himself in front of Ava's wheelchair and growled at the machine. Low, guttural. A sound that said nothing was getting past him. His body was a wall. His loyalty was absolute. The ATV rolled another few feet, slower now, and finally stopped when Ray and Cole threw themselves at it, forcing it to the ground. Only then did Titan's legs give out. He collapsed onto his side, his breathing labored, his eyes still locked on Ava. She was crying, reaching for him. "Titan, no. Mark reached them first, dropping to his knees. His hands moved over Titan's body, checking for trauma. Titan's eyes followed Mark's movements, but he didn't try to stand. He just kept his gaze fixed on Ava, making sure she was safe. "Get the vet!" Mark shouted. "Now!" Cole sprinted toward the office. Grant appeared from the equipment shed, his face pale. Ava finally freed her wheelchair from the mud and rolled to Titan's side. She leaned down, her fingers brushing his scarred face. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved me." Titan's tail moved once, a weak thump against the dirt. But when Ava touched him, something in his eyes softened. Relief. Purpose. Like this was what he'd been waiting for his whole life. A chance to protect someone and have it count. Mark's hands were shaking as he examined Titan's shoulder. Bruised, critical impact trauma, but alive, breathing, conscious. The vet arrived 15 minutes later. The diagnosis came an hour after that. Severe bruising, hairline fracture in the shoulder. But he would recover. He'd be sore for weeks, but he'd survive. Grant stood at the edge of the field, watching the vet work. Finally, he walked over to Mark. "I was wrong," Grant said quietly. "About him. About all of it." Mark looked up. "Yeah, you were." Grant looked at Titan, at the way the dog's eyes stayed fixed on Ava, even through the pain. He didn't protect her because he was trained to. He protected her because he chose to. "That's what love looks like," Mark said simply. That night, word spread through the community. The dog everyone wanted gone had just saved a child's life. The dog everyone called dangerous had thrown himself in front of a rolling ATV without hesitation. Nobody doubted him again. 2 weeks after the ATV incident, Titan took his first full walk around the ranch without limping. The bruising had faded to yellow and green patches under his black fur. The fracture in his shoulder was healing clean. The vet said he'd been lucky. Mark said luck had nothing to do with it. Titan was a fighter, always had been. Ava was with him every day during recovery. She'd wheel into his enclosure in the mornings with breakfast and stay until sunset, reading aloud from books while he rested his head on her lap. The other handler stopped being surprised. This was just how things were now, the girl and the dog, inseparable. On a Thursday afternoon, Mark called Ava into his office. The paperwork was spread across his desk. Official forms, adoption contracts, legal documents with state seals. "The ranch board met this morning," Mark said, watching his daughter's face carefully. "They voted unanimously." Ava's hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. "Voted on what?" "Titan's adoption." Mark slid the papers toward her. "If you want him, he's yours, permanently." Ava stared at the documents like they might disappear if she blinked. "Mine?" "Yours," Mark confirmed. "He can come home, live with us. He'll still train here a few days a week, but he'll sleep in your room, eat at our house, be part of our family." He paused, his voice thick. "He already is, really. This just makes it official." Ava's eyes filled with tears. She looked out the window toward Titan's enclosure, where the dog was lying in the sun, waiting for her like he always did. "Can I tell him?" Mark smiled. "I think he already knows." The move happened on a Saturday. Titan rode in the back of Mark's truck, his head hanging over the side, ears flapping in the wind. When they pulled into the driveway of the Cartwright home, Claire was waiting on the porch with a new dog bed, food bowls, and a basket of toys. Titan stepped out of the truck carefully, still favoring his shoulder slightly, and looked around. The house, the yard, the porch swing. Ava wheeled up beside him and touched his head. "Welcome home, boy." That first night, Titan slept at the foot of Ava's bed. Not in the expensive dog bed Claire had bought. Right there on the floor, positioned so he could see the door and the window and Ava all at once. Protecting, watching, trusting. The weeks that followed looked like healing in motion. Ava and Titan walked the neighborhood every morning, his pace matching hers perfectly, his body a steady presence beside her wheelchair. Kids who used to stare at Ava now stopped to pet Titan, asked his name, told her he was beautiful. And for the first time since the crash, Ava didn't feel like the girl in the wheelchair. She felt like the girl with the incredible dog. Her confidence returned slowly, like a sunrise. She started talking about school again, started making plans for the future, started laughing at dinner instead of sitting silent. Claire cried the first time she heard it, that sound she thought she had lost forever. One evening, Mark sat on the porch watching Ava and Titan play in the yard. Titan was retrieving a tennis ball, bringing it back gently, waiting for her to throw it again. His tail wagged, his eyes were bright. He looked nothing like the dog Mark had pulled from that transport crate 6 months ago. Claire joined him on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "You saved him," she said softly. Mark shook his head. "No, Ava did." "You both did." Mark sipped his coffee, thinking about all the nights he'd spent staring at Titan's file, convinced the dog was beyond saving. "He wasn't dangerous," Mark said finally. "He was grieving, and nobody saw it because they were too busy being afraid of him." Ava wheeled onto the porch, Titan trailing behind her. She looked tired but happy. The kind of tired that comes from a good day, not from carrying weight you can't put down. "He's getting faster," she said, grinning. "Bet he could outrun half the dogs at the ranch now." Mark smiled. "Wouldn't doubt it?" Ava looked down at Titan, who'd settled beside her wheelchair, his head resting against her leg. "You know what I figured out?" she said quietly. "What's that?" "He didn't need to be controlled. He just needed someone who understood his hurt." The words hung in the air, simple and true. Mark felt his throat tighten, because she was right. Titan had never needed dominance or force or fear-based training. He'd needed someone to see past the scars and the aggression to the broken soul underneath. Someone to tell him he wasn't a monster. That what happened to him wasn't his fault. That he was allowed to feel safe again. Ava had given him that. And in return, Titan had given her something she'd lost in the crash. Purpose. Connection. The knowledge that even broken things can be whole again if someone loves them enough to try. That night, as the sun set over the cart ride home, Titan lay beside Ava's bed, his breathing deep and even, his eyes closed, his body relaxed in a way it never had before. No pacing, no nightmares, just peace. And somewhere in the quiet, in the space between what was and what could be, the truth settled like dust after a storm. Nobody could tame Titan because he wasn't meant to be tamed. He was meant to be loved. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances matter and that love can heal even the deepest wounds, then we need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, share this story with everyone you know. Because stories like this, stories about hope and redemption and the unbreakable bonds between broken souls, only reach people if you help them travel. We pour our hearts into bringing you these real, raw, emotional journeys, but we can't do it without you. Your support fuels every story we tell. Your shares mean someone else gets to feel what you just felt. Your comments build a community of people who believe in second chances. So don't just scroll past, subscribe, like, share. Comment below and tell us, what did this story mean to you? Who in your life needs to hear it? Because the next story we tell could be even more powerful. But only if you're here to experience it with us. Don't let this be the last story that changes you. Be part of the community that keeps these stories alive.